Hello again. My name's Adrian Gilbert, and I'd like to welcome you back once more to the Invisible College, where today we're going to go back to the book of Revelation, which we've had a bit of a break from for a few weeks, and we're going into chapter 14. And that's about 144,000 virgins and the messages of the angels. It's a sort of in-between chapter between we've been told about the beast, and we're going to find out a lot more about the destructions which are about to come to the earth. And we have this sort of in-between chapter, which is kind of telling us sort of what we should be thinking about doing. It's this kind of last chance chapter in many ways. And I think it's important that we should look at this separately and see where it takes us. Right, so, I've got my glasses here. Here we are. With no more ado, let's press on with it. So this chapter is called the 144,000 virgins and the messages of the angels. And it begins like this, chapter 14. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, that's symbolic of Jesus, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I've left out some of this. You can read it for yourself in chapter 14. But it carries on. It is those who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They have been redeemed from mankind as the first fruits for God and the Lamb. And in their mouths no lie was found, for they are blameless. Right, well, I think that needs a little bit of explanation. Those of us who are not virgins, and I must confess I'm not a virgin, I've been married for nearly 40 years. Does this mean that we're going to be left out? Does this mean that there's no hope for us, we're done for, we're not going to be the chosen ones, as it were? Well, it does say they're the first fruits, and that doesn't mean they're the last fruits. So I think there's hope for the rest of us who've lived, we've done our best. And yes, we've probably sinned. I know I have. And we've begged for forgiveness. We hope that, we can make recompense and we can get to heaven. That's the basic theme. Very few of us are perfect. So what is this really talking about? And I think we need to look a little deeper into the symbolism of what virginity means and what virginity means in terms of a higher virginity, in terms of religious notions connected with that. And it's really to do with sublimation, but I'll go into that here now. Now, before we go into that, there are 144,000 are, of course, the same as the 144,000 sons of Israel we met in an earlier episode, 12,000 drawn from each tribe. Yeah, so they were kind of blessed and they come out early and they're the first fruits, as it said there. And the first important thing to note here is the Israelites are not all Jews. Now that needs a little bit of explanation. Everyone thinks, you've got the state of Israel, and yes, it's been reformed in 1948. So 5th of May, 13th of May, something like that. And now all the Jews moving back to Israel have rebuilt their country, very prosperous country, quite powerful within the Middle East. And you think, yeah, Israel, it's there. Well, when I first went to Israel and visited it back in 1972, and I went to work on a kibbutz and I spent time in Tel Aviv, and I met a very wise man and he showed me the Bible and he explained certain things to me, and he showed me, I hadn't really thought about this before, that actually the Jews are not the sole Israelites. The Jews are descended from the tribe of Judah. Actually, two tribes. There was Judah and Benjamin that formed a little kingdom around Jerusalem in the immediate area around there. But there were 10 other tribes which disappeared from history. And it's the other tribes actually that were called Israel. And you may remember from your Bible there was a King Saul. Well, he was from one of those tribes. And those tribes that there was a splitting, and I'll come to that in a second. So the first important thing to note here is that the Israelites are not all Jews. The kingdom of Judah, from which we derive the name Judeans or Jews, was only a part of the kingdom of Israel, as it existed prior to the death of King Solomon and accession of his son Rehoboam. So why is virginity so important to the 144,000? Is this just prudery on the part of St. John? Well, the reason is simple. It's not so much that you must never have had sex. It is the need to retain sex energy and transport this to higher centres in the brain. In India, this is called raising kundalini. There is an understanding that the sexual energy resides at the lower abdomen. In normal life, this is consumed in the practice of sex. What yogis try to do is to wake up this energy and cause it to rise up the spine. It will then pass through various energy centers called chakras or lotuses on its way to the brain. These practices seldom work and are not without risk. Now, before I go into that, now I must apologize, bringing in Hinduism here, we're talking about the Bible. You're probably thinking, yeah, but that's sort of paganism. It's nothing to do with us. Well, there is a Christian equivalent to this. This is actually very deep esoteric understanding. And if you ever do practice any of these things, I practiced yoga a lot when I was in my 20s, you will experience the chakras. In fact, I can sense my chakras when I do certain practices today. They do exist. There are these energy centers in your body that control different organs and different parts of your being, you could say. And the lower one, particularly in your lower abdomen, for a man, it's sort of above. That's sort of where your bladder is, roughly, above your penis. If you are sexually aroused, you will feel energy there. I guess it's the same with women. It was roughly the same area for them. And you will feel desire to have sex. And if that sex happens, then there is a movement, a movement of energy between the man and the woman, that they give each other something of their energy that sort of balances out. Now, I've done another video on this, what's sex all about? I think it's called something like that. But this is talking about a sort of internalized sex, that it is possible to move the sexual energy up the body to the head. This is called sublimation. And it's the reason why monks and nuns sort of want to be celibate, or they're told to be celibate. Now, I don't know that it ever works for them. I suspect that in a lot of cases, all priests are, Catholic priests are meant to be celibate. But of course, if you're not actually doing these practices and you're not shifting that energy to use it in other ways, you're going to be very, very frustrated sexually. And I'm sure that is one of the major reasons why there's been these huge scandals, particularly in the Catholic Church, but I think in other places too, of abuse between priests and choir boys or whatever, because they're not in proper physical relationships. I think all priests should be married, unless they really are intending to be celibates in the real sense of the word. They should be married. They would be in a much better position to understand other people's situations in their churches if they were. And I think it's actually a crime in the church that they're not allowed to be. And it wasn't true with the apostles. I mean, some of them were married, like notably St. Peter himself. So yes, there can be the need for um, celibates, people who are raising energy up in their body. Um, but in normal life, most people are going to want to be married, or at least, these days you say in a partnership. But I actually disagree with that too. I think if you have found the person that you want to be with, you should marry them. Pure and simple. Because if you don't, you're not really making a true commitment in front of God and the eyes of mankind. And actually, that will, if you do get married, as I say, I've been married nearly 40 years. If you do get married, you'll find that that actually helps to strengthen the bond. Now, I know there's a lot of divorce these days, and so it doesn't work for everyone, but marriage is not necessarily an easy thing. There's obviously there's the honeymoon period when everything's rosy and delightful. You're going to come into problems, and there are going to be times things go up and down. There can be problems with sickness, be problems of loss of jobs, and each one having to take different turns of taking burdens. There's going to be sacrifice implied. And I'm going to do another lecture which is connected with that, about transformation, and sacrifice is actually part of what's required. But anyway, don't expect marriage to always be lying in rose petals. Roses have thorns as well, and you're going to have to learn how to cope with those if you want to have a successful marriage. Anyway, so let's get back to our yogi, and we're going to look now at sort of Western equivalents, because there are, but they're not spoken of openly. In the West, all this has been kind of suppressed because of various persecutions within the church, particularly of people very suspicious of anyone trying to do things, that take away from the power of the priesthood. And we are actually in a situation such as Jesus found himself in when he was dealing with wanting to teach the people, and the Pharisees, the equivalent of the priesthood, were getting in the way. They just wanted people to observe certain laws and ordinances, come into the temple and pay money to buy doves to sacrifice, and it had become an industry. And this is what always happens, unfortunately, with religions, that they become industries, and the people who benefit from those industries, they can only do so if they can stand as intermediaries between you and God. So if you want to have God, you've got to go through me. Yeah, I'm the guy who can forgive your sins. If I don't forgive them, you're going to hell. Now you better put some money in the plate. Unfortunately, this is a human temptation, and it happens a lot. And I don't think it's only in the Catholic Church, I think it's throughout. But you have to realize that, yes, these intermediaries, they can be helpful to you as teachers. They can be helpful to you as guides. But ultimately, your relationship with God is your relationship, not theirs. And you can have a relationship that's direct. And actually, that's what you actually need. So this has been known in the past, and people have followed the path, but they've had to do it clandestinely. And I've mentioned, I think, in some of my earlier lectures about groups such as the Rosicrucians, who were clandestine Christian mystics doing this kind of practice. But there are other ones too, the alchemists in particular. And what they did is they wrapped up their teachings in complex symbols, pictures. They wrote a lot of text to go with it. The text about alchemy, talking about transforming gold and the different steps, to get the gold. And this is all actually a cover for what they were really doing, which was transforming themselves and raising their energies up. They weren't making gold as such out of lead. And maybe some of them were trying to do that, yeah. What they talk about is the gold of the philosophers, aurum philosophorum. That was what they were after, and the gold of the philosophers is actually the aura, the golden light that would shine out. You know, we often see pictures of Jesus and the apostles with this aura around them, a golden light. That's what they were after, because that is symbolic or symptomatic of having raised the energy up and opened up the head chakra, the 1,000-petal lotus, they call it in the East, and allowing the energy from God to go through the head and to unite with the lower energy. The two have to unite together, and that brings about an opening of the heart. This is actually what it means to be born again. Very deep teaching, I'm telling you here. But this is the secret yoga of the West, you could call it. Yoga just is a word that just means yoke, yoked. And actually religio means retied. So religion is the same as yoga, actually. It's intended to retie ourselves, our lower selves, with God, with the higher, and allow the God energy to flow into us, the Holy Ghost, they call it, and unite with our lower energy to open up love through our heart chakra and put it out into the world. It's very, very high teaching, but it was known, and I'm going to show you a couple of slides here to illustrate this. Now, in the West, while the Catholic Church has always required that priests, monks and nuns are celibate, there is not much discussion about the reason for this. However, there are clues about the transformation of sexual energy to be found in alchemical literature. Alchemy is really about self-transformation, gold of the philosophers, not material gold. And this picture draws attention to the need to blend two forces, one from below, the Kundalini force, and one from above, Spirit or Holy Ghost. So you can see these two pots. There's one at the bottom and kind of smoke's rising up from that. And then you've got one at the top and the smoke's kind of coming down from that. And the two are uniting together and mixing. And this blending sustains the growth and flowering of the lily, which is a symbol of purity. This lily is the Western equivalent of the lotus. Growing the lily flowers symbolizes the opening of the chakras. So the lily is a very, very important symbol in Western mysticism for purity, virginity. So when it's talking about the 144,000 virgins, it's actually, I believe, talking about the 144,000 who have got the lily, who've opened the flowers because they've done the inner work of self-transformation. And in that way, they can become the first fruits. Do you see what I'm saying? It's not necessarily saying these are the goody-goodies who didn't go to bed with women and pollute themselves. In that sense, I don't think there's anything polluting about women for a start. And actually what that's really talking about is nature. And we're going to come to that much later on, about the equivalence between Eve and nature. And that's another subject for another time. So let's see here. So we got here the lily growing there, and you can see it's got these 5 flowers open. And they symbolize the same thing as you have in the yoga picture I showed you earlier, with the various chakras. The lotus is open, and that's what it's saying here. And that's what this mystic actually is a woman, I think. She's a soror mystica, they would refer to her, a mystical sister, aid to the work. And she's pointing and showing, this is what you've got to do, guys. Yeah, you've got to blend the upper with the lower, and that will bring about the birth and the flowering of the lotus. Sometimes it's also used with the rose, of course, as in the Rosicrucians, but the lotus symbolizes purity. And I think that is probably a better symbol for us in this situation. Now I'm going to show you another alchemical picture. And this image is more direct. You can see the man here with a sword pierces a three-headed dog. You can see that that's a dog there, a three-headed dog. And that represents Cerberus in Greek mythology. You find that in alchemical literature, they very often draw on Greek or Roman mythology as well as Bible messages. And this is kind of a secret language. If you're not educated in these things, you don't understand what it's all about. Cerberus was the guardian. He's guardian of the underworld, but he also guards the portal leading to the higher worlds. So he's got him skewered with his sword. And you can see that all these little snakes slithering away. They represent demons. They're running away from this guy because he's more powerful than them. And you can see that the man also has power over a serpent, which now curls around his sword. Again, this serpent represents the sexual force residing in the lower abdomen as it rises up within. And before I go on here, of course we're all familiar with the caduceus of Mercury, the staff with the two serpents going round it. It's a symbol of the medical profession, of the healer, healing power. And of course when someone's been through this and they've got that, they've risen that energy up and blended it, and they've opened the chakras, that is a true that can be a true healer, because they can draw the power down from God to actually do healing, like Jesus did, and like the apostles did. I know there's a lot of people who claim to be healers. Yeah, they go out and they do, I'm doing some Reiki on you or whatever. And 99.9999% of the time, those people don't have any extra energy coming to them from God. What they're using is their own energy. And if they carry on doing that, they'll make themselves very sick, because you actually need your own energies to do your own work. What you can heal with is excess. And to do that, you've got to be someone who has got excess. You've earned it. You've worked on yourself. You've developed yourself, transformed your energies, raised the Kundalini up, opened the chakra. The Holy Ghost is coming down through you. And then you can lay hands on someone, yeah, and you can do a healing on them. If you can't do that, I would not try it. It's better to go and get a bottle of medicine. Sorry to be so blunt, but I'm telling you the truth. Anyway, a little bit more here. And here is rewarded for his victory by an angel who places 3 crowns on his head. Can you see the angel there? And he's got 3 crowns of laurels. Laurels symbolize victory. So, and this relates to the famous alchemical treatise called the Emerald Table of Hermes, which concludes with these words: "And so I am called Hermes Trismegistus, having 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world. And what I've said concerning the operation of the sun is finished." Right? So Trismegistus means thrice master. Yeah? Thrice magister. Magister is a master. So he's got 3 masters. He's the triple master. And he's been given 3 crowns of laurel to show that. And it means he's completed the operation of the sun. The operation of the sun is, of course, the manufacture of gold. Gold is the metal of the sun. And you can see in here that there's bright light shining around him. That is his aura opening up and shining out from him with a golden light. Aura actually means hour. Aura means gold. Hour. A-U-R. Well, we sometimes spell it O-R, or, which means gold. So this is the aura, the golden light that comes out when you've completed the work of the sun, which is the raising the lower and blending it with the upper, which is the true work of alchemy, if you go into that. So that kind of completes our, there's a little bit more I've put here. The 144,000 are initiates who are similarly linked to God by means of subtle alchemy. Having blended their will with God's will, they cannot even think evil thoughts. In this sense, they're virgin pure. And again, that is something else that, if a person has truly gone through this, and we would call this being Christed, if they've truly gone through this, like Jesus did, he had to go through these stages too. He might have come from up high and come onto earth and been born here as a man, but even so, he has to go through the stages again. And he was tempted by the devil in the wilderness. We're told this, and he overcomes that temptation. He does the John the Baptist thing, and the dove comes down on him. The Holy Ghost enters him. He begins his mission. So we know that this is something that has to be done, and this is what these purified ones. And what happens when a person has linked their will with God? Then they can't sin. And that sounds a really crazy thing to say, but they cannot even, if a person is in that state, and I'm not going to go any deeper into it than that at the moment, they don't even think an evil thought. It can't arise, because that dragon, that serpent, is controlled. The moment it tries to do anything, it's held down. It can't. And they think they're pure. And this is what the 144,000, who are the first fruits, are going to be like. And they're in the world already. And there are people out there who are doing this work and who are preparing the way. Jesus Christ is already here in spirit. And you're going to see him before too long, manifesting. But they are the people who are, or some of them anyway, preparing the way for when he's going to come. Now then, the message of the three angels. This is the next part of that chapter 14. And the first message addressed to the world is, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water. Very direct, right? That's Revelation 14:7. In other words, this is not a time to play with atheism or Darwinian ideas of life being a spontaneous manifestation of matter. If we want eternal life, we must honor God as our creator. We must humble ourselves before him. Now, I've done 3 lectures about Darwinism, and I would suggest that you watch those lectures, because I'm showing you how that is a false teaching. The whole idea that matter can just self-arrange itself and come to life, and then that life can just self-develop and change itself and evolve to make higher forms, even a bug, let alone us, that is just an insult to the Creator. You know very well that to make this computer here required a lot of man hours and a lot of thought and a lot of intelligence from very clever people. And yes, it's evolved. It's evolved from the Colossus computer of the 1940s, when we're breaking the Enigma code. It's evolved from that. It's evolved, when I first, I used to be a computer programmer. And when I first started working with computers, everything was done with punch cards. And you had a stack of cards. You'd feed them into the card region, and they'd go in, boom, 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 boom. And each card would give you a line of code. Now, we didn't have all the terminals and things you have now. Everything was done in batch process, so you didn't have the interaction between people in live time with the computer. It was quite primitive, very primitive compared with now. But these days, you've got a computer in your phone. Your iPhone is more powerful than the most powerful computer in the world. Back in those days, it's hard to believe it. But that didn't just happen spontaneously. It happened because a lot of very intelligent people worked on it, and they developed it. So do you really think that life, with all the life forms that we have, the lions and the tigers, the giraffes, ourselves, everything just happened? Of course it didn't. And there are high intelligences involved that created what we can't even understand. You know, we tinker with life. We play around with chemicals to affect our bodies, and medicines. We cut out bits every now and then if they've gone wrong. Yeah, we can do some things like that. But we can't create life. We can't evolve new forms, higher forms. I mean, do you really think a kidney just invented itself? It's madness. And it's an insult to God to think that, because there is this higher intelligence that created everything. So this angel is saying, first of all, fear God and give him glory, yeah? So when you start saying, oh, well, you know, it all just happens, it's all just evolved, Darwinian fashion, you're actually being very insulting to God. And realize that, and you will be judged for that. And his judgment is coming. And worship him, yeah? And what does worship mean? It doesn't just mean, oh, you're so wonderful, you're so great, oh, yeah. Like, it actually means being thankful for a start, and saying thank you for what you've done, thank you for my life, thank you for what you've given me. And I really appreciate that you are the God who made the universe. And be humble. That is the most important thing. Be humble. Don't stand up on your pride and say, I'm a man, you know, I'm fantastic. You know, we can dominate everything on this planet. We're going to go to Mars and we're going to build cities on Mars. Maybe you will, but be humble about it. Say, I didn't create Mars. Mars is there. Maybe I should go and visit it. But, you know, I didn't make it. Do you understand what I'm saying here? So this angel is telling us to get down and stop thinking that man is the measure of all things, that we are the only creators in this world. We're not. We're not the creators of this universe. We're not the most intelligent beings in this universe. We've got to get to understand that and humble ourselves. So don't play with Darwinian ideas of life being a spontaneous manifestation of matter. If we want eternal life, we must honour God as our creator. We must humble ourselves before him. And then a second angel says, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the anger of her fornication. So I've put the Tower of Babel there. Babylon is where Babel, or Tower of Babel, has supposedly stood. Now what's that all about? We're going to discuss the symbolic meaning of Babylon in later episodes. I've got a lot to say on Babylon. The anger I would interpret as being God's anger. Right? So he's angry about her fornication and that spreading this to the whole world, getting the whole world to drink the wine of the anger of her fornication. And what's that all about? Well, the Greek word porneus, I've spelled it both in Greek and in Latin letters, porneus, translated as fornication, actually means prostitution. So you know the word pornography. Porne is a prostitute in Greek. Graphos means a picture. So pornography means pictures of whores, pictures of prostitutes. That's what pornography is, pictures of prostitutes. Understand that. In other words, God is angry that Babylon, the great prostitute, has seduced mankind and corrupted it, and retribution is coming. Yeah, you know that we refer to whores, prostitutes, as hookers, because a lot of the time it's not that the men go out looking for prostitutes. I mean, some do, but at other times prostitutes are trying to seduce men to get money off them, of course. And Babylon is, I don't know if, you know, it probably goes back long before Babylon. We do call it the oldest profession, but Babylon was famous for its prostitution. And we're just going to have a little look at that. Now, Babylon was famous for its customs concerning temple prostitution. Its chief goddess, Ishtar, Inanna, was identified with the planet Venus, and she ruled over love and sexual attraction, right, as a goddess, in their opinion. And Ishtar was a popular goddess. Well, yeah, she would be, wouldn't she? But could also be stirred to great anger if crossed. She had witch-like qualities and was feared as well as worshipped. And just look at her feet. They're like birds' feet, aren't they? Or lizard feet. She's kind of not human. A bit demonic, you might say. And look at the owls on either side of her. And the double-headed beast that she's standing on. And her temple was near to the Ishtar Gate. Now, the Ishtar Gate, the famous gateway in Babylon, which was actually excavated by the Germans in the 19th century. I think it was the 19th, might have been even the 18th century. I think it was the 19th. And they took it back to Germany and they re-erected it there. And then they built a new one in Babylon, a replica, although the Iraqis would like to have the original back. It's a bit like the Elgin marbles, in the British Museum that the Greeks want back, the Parthenon marbles. Well, it's the same thing with the Ishtar Gate with Iraq and the Germans. So here you can see the re-erected new Ishtar Gate at the archaeological site of Babylon. I mean, Babylon's not lived in these days, but it is an archaeological site and a tourist attraction if you're not afraid of being blown up. Anyway, the cult of Ishtar required that every woman of Babylon must at some time in her life go to the Ishtar Gate and have sex with the first man who asked for her favors. The money he paid would go to the temple of Ishtar. Women waiting at the gate were not allowed to go home until this was accomplished. I mean, can you imagine that? Imagine if we said, right, you've got to go to the gateway of London, right? A suitable gate. Let's say Ludgate. I know it's not there anymore as a physical gate, but that's the gateway that leads from Fleet Street towards St. Paul's, and coming from the west end. We said to all the women in Britain, we said, oh, well, one time in your life, you've got to go and stand next to that gate. And the first guy who comes along and throws the money in your lap, you've got to have sex with him as a prostitute, and that money will go to support the temple. Can you imagine it? Well, this was accepted in Babylon. This is why Babylon is the great whore. It's built on whoring. And even high-born noble women were required to appease the goddess in this way. And the reason for this strange ritual was that in the legend of Ishtar, she too had prostituted herself. Thus, prostitution was a part of the Babylonian religion and way of life. And this Babylonian custom spread throughout the Middle East. Ishtar is called Astarte in Syria, and the cult of Astarte was imported into Israel as well. So I don't know if the Israelite women were having to do this too. I don't think so, but certainly the cult of Ishtar was imported into Israel and Lebanon and surrounding areas. This kind of goddess figure and this sort of prostitution, and Solomon married people who were of this religion, but we'll come to him in a second. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and received a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. Now, I think, I should have shown you that slide. I think most of us would be quite horrified by that this is a situation that we find ourselves in, that we've been told, you mustn't worship the beast or have his mark on your forehead or on your hand. What does that mean, on the forehead or hand? Well, the hand is what you do things with, and the way that you're trading, the way that you're using the beast's system would be incriminating. But also marked on your forehead means that you've taken that into your mind. Your front mind is what you consciously are aware of and accept. So if you've taken on board the Darwinism, for example, that I was saying, you've got to get that out. It's not true. It's a lie, and it's one of the corruptions that's been put into mankind and is taught in all our schools. And it's actually a corrupt, decadent teaching that raises our vanity up above that of God. And if you accept that and you think that that's the truth, you're on for a nasty shock. But there's other things about the beast as well that we also need to consider. We discussed the beast in the last lecture. It has 7 heads and 10 horns. And the number of the beast is 666, which in the Bible is the quantity of talents of gold which King Solomon received per year in taxes and tribute. So I've done another lecture on this, the previous lecture, so I'm not going to say too much. But just think about it. There is actually the number 666 in the Bible if you will only go and look for it. You don't have to do any numerology. You don't have to add up the number 666. You don't have to divide it by 36. You don't have to do any of that. It's actually there that King Solomon received tribute and taxes of 666 talents of gold per year. So it's got something to do with Solomon. And Solomon was the richest king of his era, his wealth coming partly from his own people, but also from tribute nations that he had conquered or required to pay him Danegeld in return for their freedom. Danegeld, in case you don't know, I'm English, so I know about these things, but there was a time in the 900s, what do we call that, the 1000th century, or whatever, what would you call it, I don't know, 10th century perhaps, 10th century I guess, when the Vikings were invading Britain, and to keep the Danes out, the English paid them money. And we called it Danegeld. Geld means money in German, or probably in Danish too, I don't know. But the Danegeld was the money we had to pay the Danes, so they weren't raiding the monasteries and raiding the coast and taking people away as slaves, what have you. So this is the Danegeld that they were paying Solomon. We know you're a great king, just don't invade us. But also he had subject nations that had to pay him tribute. So he's a very powerful guy, was Solomon. Even more money came to him from merchants and his trading fleets. I mean, he had fleets of ships going down the Red Sea, around the Mediterranean, trading goods and I don't know about services so much, but certainly trading goods. And he became very, very wealthy. You have the whole story of the Queen of Sheba, for example, coming from Africa, from Ethiopia, and bringing elephants and tusks and what have you. So he was a very wealthy guy. But the beast is not a man, but rather a world-dominating government. Its 7 crowns represent 7 powers or jurisdictions that act like independent empires, yet are parts of the same system of world government. And I'm giving you here a possible identification. I don't say that this is definitely so. I'm offering this up as my thoughts on the subject. So let's take number 1 head, USA plus satellites. Well, I think outside of the USA, most people would say that America is very dominating. It tends to think it can do whatever it likes with changing regimes, ordering other countries around, deciding who can have nuclear weapons and who can't, and who can trade with whom, and imposing sanctions on people it doesn't like. It's a very dominating force. Now, as a Briton, I'm very fond of America, and I'd rather it was America doing this than, let's say, China. But it is a very dominating force, and I think it is one of the heads of the dragon, of the beast, I should say. The second one's the European Union. European Union is very, very bossy, you know. They hate it that we British have left, that we said, right, we've had enough. Yeah, we've been in this European, we joined, you know, as a trading thing, you know, the EEC, European Economic Community, we'd trade together, we'd all get rich, that'd be great. Then it turned into this thing called the European Union. Nobody asked us, do you want to be part of a country called the United States of Europe? Nobody actually said that to us. And then they start, you know, having their own currency. They talk about having their own army and incorporating our army into theirs. And, you know, imposing taxes on us. And it costing more and more money. And worse than that, they start passing laws that we have to obey. Nobody elected the people who are framing these laws. We certainly didn't. And they're overruling our laws. And we turned around and we looked at ourselves and we said, hey, we're a sovereign nation. We have a queen, you know. She takes a coronation oath that she's under God. Yeah, that's the boss. What's she doing, you know, having this overlordship from this thing in Brussels, telling us what to do, how much we must pay, you know, taking over our country and telling us who can come and live here. So we had a referendum where we came out. And they hate us for it. You know, there's all kinds of, every day you read in the papers how, you know, they're going to stop us selling sausages in Northern Ireland, or, you know, they demand to carry on fishing around the waters around our coastline, you know. Well, it's our coastline, you know, our territorial waters. And they want to come and keep taking all the fish. And this, that, and the other. So it's still going on. But we're not in it anymore, thank God. But this is the beast, one of the beast's heads, and that's why it's so angry, because it is part of this world empire that's trying to come in. It's the European branch, the American branch doing its thing. There's a European branch pulling together France and Germany and Italy and Spain and all the rest of them into a unit that can then be absorbed into an even bigger unit, which is the beast itself. And then the third one's Russia. Yeah, well, Russia is not quite as it was with the Soviet Union. And actually, in many ways, I wish we would have better relationships with Russia. But Russia is certainly a bloc, and it's certainly a controlling influence within its orbit. And it's a nuclear-powered bloc, and it's a bloc that is actually got a lot of weapons that even America hasn't got. So it's got to be respected as well. And it's one of these heads. And China, the rising dragon, you know, of the East, surely that's a head. Yeah, that's trading around the world, taking over countries through trade, manipulating things to get nations bankrupt so they have to then allow the Chinese to take over the ports and control what goes on in parts of Africa and Asia. It wants to reinvade or to invade Taiwan. It's already taken over Hong Kong fully. Yeah, very powerful nation and very dangerous nation, I think, at the moment under the Communist Party. Very anti-Christian nation as well. I don't think the people so much. It's the Communist Party that's the problem. Communism, it comes from the devil anyway, and they are its major bastion. And then I put here a revival of the Turkish Caliphate. So you should see these. Turkish Caliphate was ended in 1924 by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. And there was what we would call the Ottoman Empire, at one time stretched over the Balkans and far out into the Central Asia and over all of Arabia and in parts of Africa. It was a big deal, and it sort of claimed carrying the banner of Muhammad, awaiting his return, as it were, the Caliph. And the Caliph was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, living in Constantinople, or Istanbul, as they would call it. That ended in 1924 when the place was being modernized by Ataturk, who introduced all sorts of Western things like getting rid of the fez and the veil, getting people to wear Western-type clothes, writing Turkish using the Latin alphabet instead of the Arabic alphabet, and generally Westernizing Turkey to the point where it is almost becoming European. Almost. But that's all been reversed by this guy, Erdogan, who's in there now, who's president now. And there is a prophecy in the Bible, I'm going to go into the whole prophecies in the Bible to do with this, about the revival of Turkey and how it's going to lead a big invasion of Israel. So I would put them in there as well. Now, I put the other two there, the papacy. Well, the papacy has inherited a lot of the attributes of the Roman Empire. For example, the Pope is called Pontifex, builder of bridges, and that was one of the titles of the emperors of Rome. A lot of the Roman festivals gone into the Catholic calendar and just changed their names and become, instead of worshipping certain gods and so on, they have saints on those days. And it's structured in a kind of pyramidal fashion with the Pope at the top. He's supposed to be infallible. How he can claim that and keep a straight face, I don't know. I mean, if he were truly an initiate, with that energy having risen up and blended with, with God, with his will, with God's will, well, maybe. But from what I can tell, he doesn't look very infallible to me. And then you've got all this pyramid of power structures, and that's not the way of Jesus, as far as I can tell from reading the Bible. And I was brought up Catholic. But I put it down there because it's got a lot of power, especially in the third world, Latin America, Africa, parts of Asia. Yes, you might think that the Roman Catholic Church has declined a lot in Europe, but that's only Europe. It's actually still, there's over 1 billion people. I think they say 1.4 billion who are followers of the Catholic Church. So the Pope might not have armies at his disposal, but he has got souls. And what he says actually commands a lot of respect and allegiance from a large number of the people. So in that sense, I think it might be one of the heads. And then India. Well, I've got nothing against India. I think India is a very, very interesting country. I don't go along with the polytheism, but I think it's a very interesting country, for example, about their knowledge about yoga. But the reason I put it there is because it's such a big country in terms of population. It rivals China. So this is a big country with a big influence, which is growing. So I think we must respect that and say that maybe India is the seventh head. Now, of course, there's an awful lot of countries that aren't actually the commanding head, as it were, of this, but they'll be incorporated into the body. The whole world's going to be ruled over by this beast, we're told that in the Revelation. So those might be the obvious heads that we see, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be outside of its control. The whole world is going to be controlled by this, at least for a short time. Persia, which we call Iran today, which is predominantly Shiite Islam, and its satellites, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Not all of Iraq, but a large part of Iraq is Shiite. And that's represented by a separate symbol, the lamb with two horns. Now, we've talked about that in the previous lecture. So Persia is there, but it's more like a cheerleader for the beast rather than being the beast itself. So that is one very good reason why America's not been able to subdue Iran, because Iran has a role to play in the upcoming drama that we're seeing. It is the rebirth of the Persian Empire. the ram with two heads, two horns. And we can recognize in the beast the overall government of the world. Its 7 heads are competing blocks, but its real power comes through control of the wealth of nations and overriding their legal systems.